Hey guys, welcome back to Inchworm Gardens. Today's video we're going to be covering some basic tomato care, pruning, and staking or trellising your tomatoes. And I'm also going to be sharing 2 mistakes that I made that hopefully we can all learn from. Let's get started. Well, it just started raining, but hey, let's talk about the 2 types of tomato plants that we have, determinate and indeterminate. And it actually is important to know which one you're dealing with because it makes a difference on how you prune and stake that plant. So what do those 2 words mean? Determinate, that means the plant is genetically designed to grow to a certain determined height, produce a certain amount of flowers and fruit, and then the plant will die off. That's in contrast to an indeterminate tomato, which will just continue to grow, produce more flowers, more fruit all through the season until frost or virus comes and kills the plant off. All right, let's talk about supporting your tomato plant in some way. Now, a tomato plant is naturally a sprawling vine. That's why it doesn't have any sort of built-in mechanism for gripping or vining up a wall or something, because it would actually prefer to grow along the ground horizontally and spread its fruit that way. We're basically defying nature by trying to grow tomato plants vertically. So if you ever have trouble keeping a tomato plant upright, just know that you are actually defying nature, so it's okay. There's going to be mistakes. Which leads me to my first big mistake with growing tomatoes, has to do with staking. I'll show you that in a minute. Actually, I'll just show it to you right now. This plant right here, I had it nice and secured to this stake. All was good, but the mistake that I made is I had it tied up too low. I had one tie down here and nothing up here. So when a big wind came through, like happened just yesterday, a big hailstorm blew through and knocked the poor thing right over. And where did it fall over? At the exact point that I did have a tie, which was right here. It was connected just like that. The thing came forward and just fell flat on its face, cracked the stem, which could totally be a death sentence for this plant. I did fasten this little splint out of popsicle sticks and twine. I'm hoping that will help. I'm not 100% sure, but the thing is doing fine right now, so I think it will be okay. But that is the mistake that I made that I want you to learn from. When you're tying up your tomatoes, make sure you have it tied up tall. I could even put another one up here to be safe. You see what I'm saying? See what I'm talking about? You shouldn't have a lot of growth at the top, especially when you have heavy tomatoes fruiting. The thing can just fall over because it naturally wants to do that, like I was talking about. So there you go, mistake number 1. Don't let that happen, because oh man, it would be a bummer to lose this plant. Check this out. This is Barry's Crazy Cherry, known for producing crazy amounts of flowers and tomatoes. Really excited to see this one go to fruit. So hopefully it will be okay. And here's some other examples of plants tied up so you can see basically what it looks like. You see, you just secure that main stem against some sort of stake to keep it close by and prevent it from getting knocked over. So there you go, it's pretty simple. You just tie them up, keep them close, and that will protect them. All right, let's talk tomato pruning. Now, first we have to understand the anatomy of the tomato plant, which we talked about. It does not want to grow upright naturally. It wants to spread along the ground. And while it's spreading along the ground, it is creating tons of branches, which create tons of flowers, tons of fruit, and it continues its life cycle that way. Now, that's great for the plant, but when you're growing them like this, you can't have 20 different branches of tomatoes. They're just going to fall completely flat. So what we do is we train basically one main stem to produce all of our flowers. That's the idea. 1 or 2 main stems producing all the tomatoes. And those extra flowering branches are lovingly referred to as suckers, I guess because they suck the energy out of the plant. The plant is trying hard to produce many different branches, tons of different flowers, tons of different fruit, and it actually takes energy away from the fruit that does exist. So instead of less tomatoes that are really nice, you get a ton of tomatoes that aren't as good. So the way that you identify suckers is you look for the growth between the main stem and then these side leaves called sun leaves. So this side growth here, this is never going to produce a tomato. This is just leaf. The place that the tomatoes exist is on the main stem. See, that's a nice little truss of tomatoes right on the main stem. So you have that main stem, and then where the main stem meets the leaves, right in this little corner, this little armpit, is where the suckers grow. So here's one that I chopped off, and there's one growing currently. So you simply keep an eye out for these, and while they're young like this, you come through and you just pop them off. Now here's a good example of a sucker that's pretty long now. But you can see where it's growing, right? Main stem, leaf growth to the side, and right in the middle, you got a sucker. Now you can see where it's almost difficult to prune because look what's happening on this sucker. Already getting flower buds. Now if you're so compassionate and you just let every sucker go like that, it will bite you in the long run. So as painful as it is, gotta take this whole guy, get my hand out of the way, snap that off. You see? That's a sucker. Look, this sucker is even growing a sucker. But look, now that main stem has all these other flower trusses, which this plant is now going to put its energy into growing those tomatoes instead of trying to basically start a whole other plant. Now, speaking of starting a whole other plant, did you know that you can take these suckers, you can put them in water, they will root, and then you can plant basically a clone of your tomato plant, which I might do. See, here we go. I already have two other little suckers that I've put in here. Put that one in as well. Just got a jar with some water in it. Need to put a little bit more in there, but those will actually start rooting. You'll see little white roots, and then you can stick them in the ground, and you've basically created a clone of your tomato plant. Now here's the ultimate example of letting a tomato sucker go too long, because it can actually get a little confusing. So you have this main stem here, and then it kind of splits off. It almost forks, like which one is the main stem, which one is the sucker. Well, I couldn't tell either, so I let them both grow, and now look what we have. We have basically two full stems, which that's okay. I'm gonna let this tomato basically be a two-stem tomato. So you can make that decision. If you really don't want to take a sucker out, you can let it grow, and you just have to realize you're gonna have multiple stems to manage. Now this tomato is called a teaspoon currant. So these tomatoes are actually super tiny, so they're not gonna be very heavy, so I think this tomato will be fine. And this is a perfect example of when to use a tomato cage. So you see this, the way that this is growing, it's kind of hard to stake it up because the two branches go in different directions. So when you put a tomato cage, see this, each branch is basically laying against the cage right there. So that's gonna give it that extra support. Now I want to mention that these are all indeterminate tomatoes. Now that makes a difference, because remember, these are just going to continue to grow all season, produce more and more flowers, more and more fruit. That's why we're trying to keep them down to 1 or 2 stems only. Determinate tomato, it sets that determined amount of fruit and flowers, so it's actually encouraged to keep those suckers, because you want as many branches as you can to get as many tomatoes as you can, because that plant is not going to get that huge. It's not going to grow forever. It's going to grow to a certain height, and then it's going to die off. So if you remove suckers, you're just taking away the potential of more tomatoes. So indeterminate, you want to prune them like I'm doing here. Determinate, just keep the suckers on there, put them in a tomato cage or something like that. They will need some sort of support still, but keep that in mind. Indeterminate, keep them down to 1 or 2 stems. Determinate, keep all the stems. Another name for these determinate varieties is bush. So if you go to Home Depot, I know they sell a tomato called like Better Bush Boy or something like that. So that also means it's a determinate plant. If you don't know which one you have, you can just Google it and it'll tell you. And here's one more sucker example. So you have this main stem, got these nice tomatoes growing off of it there. Follow the main stem up, another nice truss of tomatoes. And then right there, look at that. See, it's growing right in the middle between the main stem and the side branch. You got a big sucker right there. So I should have plucked that off a while ago. When it gets this thick, well, you can see first here's a small one. So this is kind of when you want to catch them, because you can easily just pop them off. Just like that. This guy, I don't even want to try to break it off, because you don't want to leave that big of a gash. I don't want to like rip it or anything. So I'm going to come in with some pruners and snap that one off. But there you go. So does that make sense? Keep an eye out for those suckers, and that will make a difference for your tomatoes. It really depends on what plant you're growing and how you're wanting to grow it, but that is the basics of tomato pruning. Okay, so now do you want to hear about my faux pas in pruning? I got so overzealous that I actually pruned off the growing tip of this plant. Now, do you realize what that means? I pulled off what I thought was a sucker was actually the main stem. That means no tomatoes, because as we know, tomatoes don't grow from these leaves, and that's all I have on this plant. I literally just plucked off the main growing tip, which I think was like right here or something. I don't even know where it was, but it's no longer there. So when you're pruning suckers, just be careful you don't accidentally snip off the main growing stem. But if that does happen, remember, the sucker will basically produce a whole nother plant. So all you have to do is leave a sucker, and there you go, you got the plant growing again, which I've done here. See down here? There's a sucker, which I normally would have cut off, but literally that's my only hope for any tomatoes on this plant, so I've kept it on there. And you can see it actually does have some little flower buds. And as a backup, I did plant 2 new seeds of this same variety because I did not want to miss out on these plants. So I have this plant, which I cut the head off. I have a sucker growing. I do have 2 seeds, and I also took one of these suckers and I put it in the glass jar that you saw, so that will basically propagate a new plant. So there are always ways to recover if you make mistakes, but hey, it is a learning process, and so learn from them and continue on. All right, that's it for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Good luck with your tomatoes. We'll catch you on the next one.